Hi guys, I'm Megan Brightwood and welcome back to my channel. So I was recently asked if I would share a how to knit video on a matching hat and cowl set. So that is what I'm going to be doing today. I'm going to walk you through how I made this hat and this cowl. They both have a ribbed texture, so they're very stretchy and fit a ton of different people. In fact, this hat looks super cute on my son Charlie, who is 1.5, and it will fit, my daughter Evelyn, who is 4, as well as me. So yeah, very versatile pattern, and they are made out of a Cascade Yarns Eco Alpaca, so they're 100% undyed alpaca. But before I get into how to knit this, I did also want to just quick run over a couple things. So the written instructions for these projects will be linked to my blog, so you can check the description down below for that link. And then I will also include timestamps for the different parts of the project. So if you're looking for how to cast on or how to do the crown, all of that will be in the description box down below. I want to try to make this as easy as possible, but yeah. Oh, also sizing. So like I said, these projects fit a lot of different people. They're very stretchy. However, if you do want to kind of mess around with the sizing a little bit, what I did with my hat is I knit 8 inches and then I started working on the crown. But if you want to have no brim, you could try to just knit 7 inches, or if you wanted a larger brim, you can knit further. And if you want a hat with a larger circumference, all you have to do is add in groupings of 4 until you get to the right size. So I cast on 88 stitches for this hat, but if you wanted a little bit bigger, you could do 92 or 96, just add 4 until you get to the right size. So without further ado, let's hop into how to make this hat and cowl. So for both the hat and the cowl, I'm going to be using these 4mm or US 6 needles. They are a cable needle. And then the yarn that I'm using is this one. It is a Cascade Yarns Eco Alpaca, so it's 100% undyed alpaca yarn. And the colorway, I believe, is Cafe Au Lait, and I really love the colorway on this. So I'm going to start with the cowl because that's going to be the easiest project to show you. So what I'm going to do is start with a German twisted cast on. So it's very similar to a long tail cast on, but has a little bit more stretch to it. So I'm going to start out with a little slip knot here, and then I'll show you how to do the German twisted. So I have my working yarn here. This is the one that is attached to my yarn, and then I have the tail of my yarn over here. And what I'm going to do is take my thumb and go right under the tail of my yarn here. And if I were to do a long tail cast on, I would go right in the middle, right next to my thumb, but instead I'm going to go under both of those loops and grab that second one, wrap my working yarn around, and then I'm going to go ahead and just drop that loop over. So let me show that to you again. I'm going to go under with my thumb, and then I'm going to use my needle to go under both of those loops, grab the second, wrap my working yarn around, and drop that loop over the edge. So I've got 3 stitches here now, and I'm going to continue doing this until I have 132 stitches. So now that I have 132 stitches on my needle, I know it does look a little bit tight here, but it'll loosen up as I start knitting. I'm going to start out by putting on a stitch marker right onto my right hand needle to mark the beginning of my round. And then I'm going to start knitting in K2 P2 ribbing. So basically what that means is I'm going to knit 2 stitches and then purl 2 stitches. So with this first stitch, I'm going to go from front to back, wrap my working yarn around, and pull that loop through. And I'm going to do that one more time, going front to back, wrap my working yarn around, and pull through from my knit stitches. And then I'm going to take my yarn right through the middle of my needles so that it's in the front, and I'm going to purl 2. So I'm going to go from back to front this time, wrap my working yarn around, and pull through. And again, I'm going to go from back to front, go around, and pull through. Then to go back to my knitting, I'm going to bring my yarn through so that it's in the back and start knitting again. And this is basically the entire pattern. I'm just going to continue knitting 2 stitches and purling 2 stitches until my work measures 12 inches from this cast on edge here. So I've now got a nice little tube. This is about 12 inches long, and I'm going to go ahead and cast off. So the way I like to do this is I like to knit the first stitch, and then I'm also going to knit the second one because I'm doing a ribbing here. And then I'm going to go in with my left hand needle on that second stitch and pull it right over the top to bind that stitch off. So I'm going to go ahead and purl this next stitch to keep my pattern intact. And then I'm going to go from the back this time and pull that loop over. So I'm going to do that again. I'm going to purl the next stitch, go from the back, and pull that loop over. And the reason that I'm going in the back or the front is that I want to go opposite my working yarn. So this time when I go ahead and knit, then I'm going to go in front and pull that loop over. And this particular cast off method seems to just kind of have the nicest look for me. I don't know if other people have different cast off methods that they prefer, but this is the one that I like. So I'm just gonna go ahead and cast off all of these stitches. I just cast off my last stitch, so I'm gonna kind of pull this loop out a bit and cut my yarn here. And then to fasten it off, I'm going to pull the tail of that yarn right through that loop. And then I'm gonna go ahead and weave in all my ends. I just wove in my ends, so now I'm left with this big long tube, and I'm going to go ahead and fold it in half. I love double layering things that are worn in the winter, and this cowl is no exception. So yeah, that is basically my oversized ribbed cowl. I love how it turned out, and now let's move on to the hat. Moving on to the hat, I'm starting in pretty much the same way. I'm going to use a German twisted cast on to cast on 88 stitches to my size to my size 4mm or US 6 needle. And I did go over how to do this in the cowl section, so if you're just watching the hat, I would recommend going back and looking at that. But I'm going to just cast on some stitches here, and then we'll start working in the round just like we did with the cowl. So I've got 88 stitches on my needles, and as you can see, I have a much longer cable than my needles, so I'm going to use the magic loop method for knitting in the round. So I've located the center of my stitches, and I'm going to put half of them on one needle and half on the other here. And now that I have this kind of U shape, I'm going to actually start knitting in the round. So the way that I do this is I take the back needle and just pull it out so that half of the stitches are just resting. And then I'm going to start knitting in that K2, P2 ribbing, just like we did with the cowl, and let these stitches rest. So I'm going to knit the first 2 stitches, and then bring my yarn through and purl the next 2 until I get to the end of my needle. And then, as I'm getting towards the end here, what I'm going to do is just completely turn my work over so that the stitches that I just worked are now in the back, and then I'm going to slip the ones that were just resting back onto my needle. Then I'm going to pull that back needle out and start knitting again. And I do want to also take a moment to make sure that none of these stitches are twisted. That is one thing with doing the magic loop method, is you do have to check a couple times to make sure that you're not twisted, but then we can just keep on working. So as I'm rounding the corner to start my second round, I thought I would also mention that I'm not using a marker to mark the beginning of my round on this because I am using a magic loop method. I have the tail of my yarn here that is an easy indicator for me that that's the beginning of my round. If you're using a smaller cable, then you can certainly use a marker. You do kind of want to pay attention to where the beginning of your round is. So if that helps, certainly do that. but I'm basically just going to keep working in the round doing this K2 P2 ribbing until this piece measures 8 inches from the cast on edge. So I've got this nice long tube for my hat, and now we're going to start working on the crown. So on this first round, it's going to be very, very similar to all of the other ones that we've done. However, I am going to rearrange things a little bit. So this is the beginning of my round, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to knit that first stitch, and then I'm going to slide it all the way over to my resting stitches. If you're using a marker to mark the beginning of your round, you can just move your marker right to this stitch. So you're right in between 2 knit stitches. But since I am doing this magic loop, then I can have that clear indicator right there for the beginning of my round. And then I'm going to knit 22 stitches. And I'm just going to follow the same pattern that I have been. So I'm going to knit that first one, knit the next 2 until I've done 22 stitches. Okay, so I've knit 22 stitches, so I'm going to mark the center of these 2 stitches with a marker, and then I'm going to knit 22 more stitches. So since I moved the first stitch of this round to my resting needles, I'm going to also take 1 stitch from my resting needles to make that 22 stitches. So if that's what you're doing, that's an easy way to kind of mark where you're at. And I'm just going to knit that, and we'll go to the other side. So if I were using a beginning of round marker, I would also put a marker here at the next 22 stitches, but since that's a seam, I'm not going to worry about it. And I'm instead going to knit 22 more stitches and place another marker. Okay, so there's 22 stitches. I'm going to go ahead and put another marker right on there, and then I'm going to knit in the same pattern all the way till the beginning of my round. Now it's time to actually start decreasing for the crown. So I'm going to start with an SSK, or a slip slip knit. So I'm going to slip the first stitch knitwise and the second, and then I'm going to knit those 2 together, and then I'm going to knit the stitches as I see them. So this first one is a purl stitch, so I'm going to go ahead and purl that, and then I have 2 knit stitches, so I'm going to knit those 2, purl those 2 until 2 stitches before that first marker. So now that I have 2 stitches before my marker, I'm going to knit them both together as if they were 1 stitch in a K2 together. And then I'm going to slip that marker and repeat what I just did in this section. So I'm going to start with a slip slip knit, slip that one, the next one, and knit them together. And then I'm going to knit these stitches as I come across them. So I'm going to knit that first one, purl the next 2, and keep working until I get to 2 stitches before either my marker or the end of my row. So, or the end of the stitches on my needle. So we're going to just go to that side. On the next row, I'm just going to knit all the stitches as I see them. So this first one is a knit stitch, and I've got a purl stitch, and I'm just going to work this way all across the round. And if you're a little bit confused on which stitches are knit stitches and which are purls, if you can see, there's kind of a little V here. Those are knit stitches, and then on these ones you can see there's a little, almost a purl. So those are the purl stitches. So I'm going to go ahead and purl this one since there's a purl underneath that row. And then on this stitch, you can see there's a little V, so I'm going to go ahead and knit that. Another little V, I'll knit that one, and so on and so forth for the entire round. So I'm basically just going to repeat those 2 rounds until there are 16 remaining stitches. So I'm going to do a decrease round now. I'm going to slip those first 2 stitches knitwise, knit them together, and then knit the stitches as I see them until I've reached 2 stitches before my marker. Knit those 2 stitches together and repeat that decrease 3 more times. Follow that up with a round of no decreases, and so on and so forth until there are 16 remaining stitches. So I have 16 stitches remaining on my needles, and I just ended with a decrease row. So to finish this out, I'm going to knit 2 together all the way around, and then I'm going to remove all of the markers as I come to them. So I'm going to knit these first 2 together, and then the next 2. I'm going to remove that marker completely and knit the next 2 together. And the next 2. And if I'd had a marker here, I could have removed it, but I don't, so I'm just going to turn my work and just kind of keep doing that until I have 8 stitches remaining. Okay, remove that marker. And then we're gonna knit the last ones together. And there we go. So we've got 8 stitches remaining. I'm going to turn my work as if I were going to knit more, but rather than knitting more, I'm going to grab my working yarn and go ahead and cut that. And then I'm going to use that tail and slip a yarn needle right onto that so that I can kind of just squeeze all the rest of the stitches together. So I've got my needle on the tail of my yarn here, and I'm going to go in just like I would if I were knitting. And I'm going to slip all of these purlwise onto my needle. So I've got those first 4. I'm going to slide my needle right through, and then I'm going to turn this over so that I can also add these last 4 to my yarn needle. I'm going to slide that through, and before I close up this gap, what I'm going to do is just push my yarn needle right through the middle there and kind of use that to just turn the whole thing inside out. And then I'm going to just go ahead and weave in any edges, because as I pull tight, you can see the crown does just kind of tighten up there so that it's all sealed up. So I wove in all of my ends, and I did decide to add a little faux fur pom-pom. This one's from Rowan Yarns, and I've had it forever. I love that pom-pom. I actually switched it out onto whatever hat I'm wearing. So you can see that it's very, very long. All I'm gonna do is just fold up the brim of the hat so that it fits whomever wants to wear it. Honestly, because of the stretchiness of this hat, it fits me and both of my kids, who are 4 and 1.5. So yeah, very, very versatile pattern. I really love it. And there you go, that's the hat. So there you go, that is how I made this hat and cowl. I love these projects. I know that they're very basic, but I think that's part of what I love about them, is that they're very simple and understated, but still kind of pack a punch. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video, and if you did, certainly give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to see more, hit the notification bell to be notified anytime that I put up a new video. And if you have any requests for other how to knit videos, certainly feel free to leave them in the comment section down below. But I'm gonna get going, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!